Hello, welcome to this video on Bodhicaryavatara, chapter 7, verse 17. I'll call the text up for you. Here we are. Naivavashada kartavya kutume bodhirityatah yasmat tathagata satyam satyavadidamuktavan. Naivavashada kartavya kutume bodhirityatah yasmat tathagata satyam satyavadidamuktavan. Naivavashada kartavya. Kartavya. It's what's known as the future passive participle, needing to be done, requiring to be done. So if something is kartavya, it needs to be done. If it's nakartavya, it's not just does not need to be done, it tends to mean it must not be done, ought not to be done. So what is not to be done? Well, the immediately preceding word is avasada. So I'll switch to iPad. Here we are. Na eva avasada kartavya. Na eva becomes naiva. That accounts for the naiva at the beginning of the verse. And na eva avasada, the eva avasada becomes eva avasada by Santi. So analyzing it out, it's avasada. Kartavya. So, and not is defeatism or despondency, being disheartened, just losing the will to fight. Let's just look at this word and then analyze that in the context of the preceding sentence. The root sad means to sit. And earlier we had the vishada, effectively sitting apart, falling apart. Avasada, sad, avasad, and then you make a noun of it, avasada. The ava here, the idea of away, sitting away. In other words, you're backing off. You aren't equal to the task. You aren't standing up and doing it. You're avasada, sitting away, sitting back, withdrawing from it, with the sense of defeat, can't do it. So this kartavya says, na avasada kartavya. You should not be defeatist. You should not be lose your will to fight. You should not sit away like this. But this verse 17 has to be read also in the context of the previous verse, which, as I mentioned then, is an entire series of nouns. The avishada, balavyuha, tatparya, atmavidhayata, paratma samata, chaivaiva paratma parivartanam, all of a series of individual things. All of these are to be done. All of these, naiva avasada kartavya, all of these things in verse 16, and not avasada is what you should be doing. So this kartavya, it applies to the avasada at the beginning near the beginning of verse 17, but it also applies to everything in the previous verse. So it's an entire list that then spills over into verse 17. Now you'll note that the kartavya is in the masculine singular form. even though in the preceding line we have nouns in the masculine and in the feminine and in the neuter. What happens if you get a list of nouns in Sanskrit followed by an adjective like this, to be done, then the adjective will agree with the immediately preceding nouns. So however many singulars and plurals, masculines, feminines, and neuters there have been in the list, it will agree, your adjective will agree with the last one immediately before it, which is avasada, which is why we see kartavya in the masculine singular. It's so simple as that. So basically he's saying everything in verse 16 but not avasada is what you should be doing. Kutome bodhir ityata. So kuto is kutah, meaning whence, from where, and it's very often used sometimes as a rhetorical question again. How could this possibly happen? Kutah, could this happen? Literally, from where could it happen? So it's often used to express an impossibility, almost ridiculing somebody, suggesting the opposite. How could that possibly happen? Kutah. But here it has a bit of that meaning, but also from where, kuto me bodhir, whence to me enlightenment. In other words, from where how could I possibly become enlightened? This me is the abbreviated enclitic form, to me or for me. I've done a note on that. You can see in the notes down here. The abbreviated enclitic form of the genitive mama and dative maiham. I've given the note to MacDonnell there, misspelled MacDonnell. There we are. So, looking back to this iti, kutome bodhi ityata. This iti, where's my cursor gone? There we are. This iti, followed by ata, because it's the iti followed by the vowel a, it becomes ityata. Back to, so iti, ata becomes ityata. Iti means thus, and as we know, it's the end of a quote, often used to mean, most frequently used to mean end quote, quoting what somebody else has said. But it very frequently is not just an end quote, but giving the reason for something, quoting not what a person is saying, but what a person might be thinking or fearing or wanting, or the reason for his acting in such a way. So if you say, well, I realized it was getting rather late, so I thought I'd better hurry up, you put that in Sanskrit, it is getting late, iti, I decided to hurry up. In other words, the proposition, it is getting late, iti, is the reason for the decision to hurry up. It's not something I said, but it was the mental background to what was happening. So what is being said here is that you must not give yourself over to avasada, abandoning the fight, to despair, in the belief, that iti means in the belief, kutome bodhi, how could I possibly achieve enlightenment? So you might translate it as saying, you should not be defeatist, you should not abandon the fight, because of a belief or because of the thought, how could I possibly get enlightenment? So that would be expressed that in Sanskrit, as you've said it here. You should not abandon the fight. How could I possibly get enlightened? Iti, you must not abandon the fight. So that explains the iti here. This is not the quote of words said, but the quote of a thought or a belief or a fear as the explanation for what is being done. The explanation for what? The explanation for the statement, you must not give up. In other words, you must not give up because of this belief. How could I possibly get enlightenment? This word atah at the end of the sentence, the translations I've looked at fudge it over without really translating it. Atah means from here. Hence, from here. Just as kuta is whence, atah is hence. I'm interpreting it, and I'm open to correction here, I'm interpreting the atah here to mean hence, meaning from this point, from where I am now. Because of this dreadful position I'm in now, I'm feeling despair because of this belief, how could I ever get enlightenment? I would have expected, if that interpretation is correct, the iti to come at the very end. Vikutome bodhir iti is what I would have expected if my interpretation is correct. But it could well be that the word order has been changed around a little bit. So this atah, which is part of the mental quote, as it were, is put after the iti. As I say, I'm open to being corrected on that. If any of my watchers can, please do. So, yasmat tathagatah satyam satyavadidam uktavan. So I'll call that up here again. Yasmat tathagatah satyam satyavadidam uktavan. We need to have this visarga, not visarga, anuswara here. Let me make that. There we are. Yasmathagata satyam satyavadi damuktavan. Correct. Yasmat, from the relative yad, the relative pronoun yad, meaning which. Yasmat is the, sorry, I'll give you my iPad. Yasmat, from which, and it is often used to mean because. So as we say, because in Sanskrit is yasmat. Because, or for, the Tathagata has said, from which, meaning by reason of the fact that, because. Yasmat Tathagata, because the Tathagata, who is a Satyavadi, Satyavadi idam uktavan. You see, if you look down to the grammatical analysis, I've analyzed to Tathagata Satyavadi idam uktavan. In fact, in prose it would read Yasmat Tathagata Satyavadi idam satyam uktavan, because the Tathagata, the speaker of truth, uktavan, has said idam satyam, has said this truth. So back to iPad. Vad, as we know, that makes the verbal noun vada, speaking. And as we all know from the Theravada, literally the speech of the Theras, the speech of the elders, meaning the teaching, the doctrines of the elders, Theravada. Satya, meaning, Satyavada mean the speaking of truth. if you are a Satyavadin, Satyavadin means a speaker of the truth. A person who does Satyavada is Satyavadin. In the masculine nominative singular, the in becomes an e. That's why you have in this verse Satyavadi idam uktavan, which by sandhi becomes Satyavadidam uktavan. So idam satyam, this truth, the Tathagata, the Satyavadi, the truth speaker, idam satyam, this truth, uktavan, has spoken. This construction of uktavan, it is in fact, it's not a finite verb, it's a participle. It's a past active participle. And it is formed from the past passive participle. So for example, krita just means done. By the way, it's the stem, the vant stem, which I have, I've put a reference in the grammar notes after the analysis to MacDonnell 85 and 86. So krita, passive participle, and using the masculine singular form where the event becomes van. So kritavan just means somebody who has done, having done, as an active participle. Ukta means as the passive participle, past participle, passive, spoken, said. You can make it into an active participle by putting uktavan. And it's very often used more in classical Sanskrit and Buddhist Sanskrit than in the Vedas. So you find it quite commonly used in Buddhist Sanskrit, that you have this participle, this past active participle, used instead of a verb, a finite verb. The Buddha, the Tathagata, the Satyavadi, the truth speaker, is one who has spoken. So is an uktavan. Treat it as a finite verb, which is how it's most commonly used, in place of a finite verb. So yasmat Tathagata, because the Tathagata, Satyavadi, the speaker of truth, uktavan, has spoken idam satyam. So I'll now read this verse to you again. Back up. So remember, in looking at verse 17, understand everything that's gone before. The entire list of nouns in verse 16 is part of what he's saying now, what it is and is not to be. Kartavya is to be done. So all the previous things are kartavya, naiva vashada, but not throwing in the towel, not just dropping out of the fight, sitting away, despondency and defeatism. So naiva vashada kartavya kutume bodhir ityata yasmat tathagata satyam satyavadidam uktavan. And again, naiva vasada kartavya kutume bodhir ityata naiva vasada yasmat tathagata satyam satyavadidam uktavan. So I fluffed that out. Let me just read it once more. Naiva vasada kartavya kutume bodhirityata yasmat tathagata satyam satyavadidam uktavan. And that's it for verse 17.